What is Crystal Reports? And what exactly are Crystal Reports? These questions are best answered by explaining what Crystal can and what it cannot do. Early in my professional career, I was working with the IT director of a company, shall remain nameless, where we had just installed a brand new system that handled sales, the entire manufacturing chain, and accounting for a multinational operation. It was truly a feat of information technology and provided unprecedented control and insight to a business that was traditionally hit or miss. When asked about reports to make sense of the mountains of data this very system collected, the IT director replied nonchalantly, "Don't worry, we bought Crystal Reports. It comes with all the reports we need already." To say the least, that turned out to be a gross miscalculation. Contrary to the inexplicably popular belief, Crystal does not automatically write the reports for you once installed. That would have made for a very brief career, and I would have been forced to find honest work. But I digress. Like any program, it does exactly what the user tells it to do, for better or for worse. With Crystal, there are truths that are inescapable. Not only do you have to learn the program, but learn and decipher the rules and relationships of your specific database. How does that data flow through the system? Is it captured by human data entry or RFID tag? What processes and controls are in place? Don't worry if the preceding sentence made no sense. Crystal has many tools and features that help you in this endeavor, but it will not do the work for you. The old saying, garbage in, garbage out, is especially relevant working with Crystal and databases. While technology has resulted in a proliferation of data for all types of organizations, it has highlighted the fact that your reports, Crystal or otherwise, are only as good as the data behind it. This is what Crystal can do. It can mine data from virtually any data source, transform any type of data into information, export data into several formats, produce graphical representations of collected data, create standard reusable report templates, organize, analyze, and present data in virtually any format. Provide the tools to work with all databases and/or sources. Organize your business rules and logic into a flexible and transferable tool. And there's always the flip side. What Crystal cannot do. Crystal cannot understand or define the data relationships for your specific database. It cannot develop reports for you. It cannot analyze your specific database automatically. It cannot populate or update data in a database. It cannot fix garbage data automatically. And it does not come with canned reports that work right out of the box. Well, that wraps up what Crystal Reports is and is not. In the next movie, we're going to talk about what you need. In order to use Crystal Reports 11, here are a few things that you're going to need. The minimum requirements. Windows 2000 XP or higher. 450 MHz Pentium 2 class processor, 128 MB of RAM, 600 MB recommended drive space, also a CD-ROM. And returning to the real world, here are requirements that work much better. Windows XP, best or higher, Vista. 700 MHz Pentium 3 processor or higher. 256 to 512 MB RAM for real heavy usage. 800 MB 1.2 gigs of drive space, depending on install options. Now, when I say what works well, or what works much better, it refers to how long you wish to stare at the Windows hourglass before you pass out from boredom or your system crashes. Much of this will depend on how much data Crystal will be pulling. For the purposes of this tutorial, the test database provided is a record count of about 16,000 records. Our goal in this course is to learn Crystal and the principles behind it, not load test and see how many records we can pull before our PCs crash. As a general rule, the more data you are pulling, the more memory you will require. If you run out of RAM, Crystal Reports 11 will use your hard drive to fill any shortage caused by running your Crystal Reports. We'll discuss in depth the performance of Crystal Reports later. Also, if not already installed, you may consider downloading the specific ODBC driver for your specific database. This is especially true if not using a Microsoft product, which in general comes pre-installed. For the purpose of this tutorial, no special driver installation is needed. In fact, we can skip ODBC altogether in this course, but the decision will be up to you. If you wish to take what you learned from this course and apply it, you may want to consider this step. Also, if you haven't done so already, please download the work files provided with this tutorial. Save them somewhere you can find them quickly, as they're used during the lessons. For my part, I have saved them out to the C drive folder called VTC Training. The coursework files includes a test database, formulas, and actual Crystal Reports developed for this beginner level course. The database was created in Microsoft Access, but that specific program is not required to be installed for our purposes. These will serve as good references as you progress through the course. It is also assumed that Crystal Reports XI has already been installed and working on your machine. As this is intended to be a learn-as-you-work tutorial, the lessons are meant to be followed along. The assignments and exercises at the end of the lessons are also very useful. If you find you are missing any of the minimum requirements, this tutorial will be harder to follow. Another note, due to the resolution of the movies, the training computer used in this tutorial has a screen resolution set to 800 by 600. This makes for a tight fit and reduced working display, but better text quality. On your PC, you can set it to whatever your monitor allows. The better the resolution, the more you can see and fit on your screen. Whatever your preference is, it won't affect your Crystal performance. And now, a word about versions. This tutorial is going to be taught to Crystal Reports 11 Release 2, also referred to as Crystal XI Release 2, depending on who you talk to. If you're on an earlier version of Crystal, this is going to be a little more difficult, but not impossible. It will require a little more legwork on your part, but the difference between the versions are not that radical. I am referring to Crystal's versions 8.5 to 11. The principles, strategies, and basic functions of Crystal Reports covered in this beginner level course are fundamentally the same from version to version. Of course, there may be some missing functionality and some bugs that you may come across in earlier versions, not to mention the menus and features being rearranged. The farther from Crystal 11, the more things have changed, been moved, or have been added. The one downside is you'll not be able to open the sample reports and exercises, but you can create on your own using whatever version you have installed in your PC. The upside is you'll get more practice. For example, the database expert. This has changed little since Crystal 8. The ability to connect to the data source and join tables and define the joins to pull exactly the data set you need is roughly the same. As you can see, my database expert and all versions have something in common. They have the ability to connect to a data source, pull in tables and fields, link data. This is a fundamental function of Crystal, and again, has not changed that much if you're on Crystal version 8.5, on 9, on 10, or Crystal 11 Release 1. The principles remain the same. You pull in the tables you need, you join them based on the relationships, and from there you pull the data onto the report. Another example is the select expert. In all versions, you can still pull in the fields you need and adjust what filters you are choosing. This has not changed from version to version. For example, I can filter on specific IDs anytime I see fit. It's the same whether you're on Crystal 8.5 or Crystal 11. Again, it'll be a little more work if you're on an earlier version, but the principles remain the same. One final example would be the ability to format. This has changed very little. There's a few extra whistles and bells if you're on the latest version, but you still have the ability to choose borders, choose your font, make it italic, bold, or bold italic. You can choose the size. You can even choose the color. You can even add your effects. In fact, you can even adjust the spacing. You can even turn it into a hyperlink. Again, the basic fundamentals of this program, again, while it may have a fancier interface in Crystal 11 Release 2 than, let's say, Crystal 8.5, it still is fundamentally the same. Ideally, Crystal 11 would be the version to have, but this course has plenty to offer if you have a previous version down to Crystal 8.5. Just be prepared to dedicate more time and effort. We're going to discuss Crystal 11 installation options. While this tutorial will not cover the actual installation of Crystal Reports, this is best left to your IT professional and your specific Windows setup. You will need to be aware, or at least know where to go, in case you find yourself using Crystal Reports and missing a feature or a data access driver that you're going to need. This is the Crystal Reports 11 Release 2 setup window. This, as it clearly states, helps you select features that you'd like to install. As you can see, once we collapse this window, we have many different options. Crystal Report Designer, Functions, Data Access, Export Support, Custom Charting, Geographic Mapping, etc. A lot of these come by default installed with the Crystal Reports program. However, not all functions are installed. One of the most important functions are the data access functions. As you can see here, Crystal Reports has a lot of native direct access drivers, we'll get into that later, that allow you to connect to virtually any data source. We have the Business Object Universe, Microsoft Access, OLAP Cube, JDBC, IAMDB2, Microsoft Outlook, Pervasive, Sybase, Oracle. These are functions and features that help you communicate more effectively and have a more stable and solid connection with your chosen data source. This is an important list to go through, as if you are installing it or your IT professional is installing it, you need to kind of pick and choose the ones you want. If you're in doubt, you can of course just install them all and figure it out later. Or if you have limited drive space and want to make an efficient installation, you can go through and remove the ones you don't want to see. I do have some recommendations. The file system option is actually a fairly neat tool. It allows you to point at your own PC and treat it as if it were a database and basically be able to read and see what files, what type they are, what size they are, all sorts of attributes. This is especially handy in some places where there's a multiplication of thousands and thousands of Crystal Reports in various locations, and this will help you find them and classify them and hopefully bring them to some semblance of order. I've also seen people take Crystal Reports and point them at Microsoft Outlook to classify and organize and get a list of their basic email. Another option I would recommend are the field definition and Crystal data objects. If you have complicated Crystal Reports using data objects and/or you need to see how a certain field is defined, either via the database or via your own custom formula, these options will come in handy. As for your specific case, obviously, if I was clairvoyant, I'd probably focus my attention on winning lottery numbers. But you're going to have to go through this list and see if your case applies. And I would highly recommend, if it does, download this driver, or make sure that your IT professional will choose this option for your Crystal install. Export support is another option that I would also recommend in passing. Is good to have, because while you may have Crystal Reports, the people you're distributing the actual data to may not. So you'll probably have to use like an Excel, a PDF, and this is just something that makes it a little bit easier to get from point A to point B. You also have some custom charting, geographic mapping, which is a neat tool that if your database has data broken down by state or region, this will help you visually represent that data as opposed to producing a mere list with, hey, these records belong to Texas. They also come with some sample reports. Now, sample reports, you have to be careful. Sample reports does not mean you can pull these reports out, point them at your data source, and expect them to work. But these sample reports are very helpful when learning how to do different things, or if you want to see how things are set up. They provide some samples for you. In summary, it's important to know how you're going to use it and what your data source is. I've given you some common options that will come in handy as you work through this tutorial. In your specific case, you may need to do a little bit of research and find out which data sources, options in this case, will come in handy.